Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. Lots to get to this morning. We have updates coming out of Israel. The battles are getting bloodier, and we also have a new look at exactly how Palestinians in Gaza felt about Hamas prior to October 7th and some indications of how support has only grown because of what happened on October 7th and the Israeli response. We also have Hunter Biden. Looks like he's going to be held in contempt, refusing to testify privately, although he does say he is willing to testify publicly, so we'll break all of that down for you. Also, a fascinating report on how a bunch of tech giants are building housing, new sort of like modern day company towns. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong there? We'll look at that. Saagar's got a special report for you on the latest, some very sketchy doings with regard to UFO transparency. We also have a clip that went viral coming out of Harvard. Yet another former Obama official, this time their wife, stalking a student who's wearing keffiyeh, accusing her of wearing a terrorist scarf. Right. Yeah, you got to see it to believe it. And Saagar also has a report on the war in Ukraine. Before we get to any of that, though, we're really excited. Later today, we're going to be filming another interview with RFK Jr. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. Saagar, what is the release schedule for this one?
Yes, so our premium members will be able to watch it first, as promised, for all of our big interviews that will drop tonight. For the public, it will drop sometime tomorrow, so you guys stay tuned. You can become a Breaking Points premium member right now, breakingpoints.com, and you can take advantage of our discount if you want to go ahead and sign up to watch it early and or support all of our work going into the election. We plan on covering RFK Jr. extensively because we have seen effectively like a media blackout cover-up where they will include him in the polls, but they just like pretend he doesn't exist. He's probably going to be the most consequential independent candidate since Ross Perot, and yet nobody seems to be discussing that. So we'll ask him about it.
Bunch of stuff we want to get into with him. Really excited to talk to him again. You know, state of his campaign. There was just a report about all the difficulties of getting on the ballot. So talking some of the nitty-gritty of that, how he's thinking about potentially staffing an administration, VP picks. Of course, I got a lot of questions for him about Israel and other issues of the day. So really looking forward to that conversation, and we should have a good hour with him to get into a bunch of different stuff. So
it's gonna be great.
Stay tuned for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the news. Put this up on the screen. So the Israeli government and the IDF have been trying to portray an image of victory as they have, you know, basically already completely destroyed northern Gaza. Massive death toll, massive civilian death toll. Well, we're now starting to get these little glimpses into how the ground operation is actually going for IDF soldiers. And we have this report from Ynet. Apparently 1/5 of the IDF troop fatalities suffered in Gaza have actually been due to friendly fire or accidents. This, again, according to the IDF, according to data, at least 20 of 105 deaths since the launch of ground operations not caused by enemy fire. The military says they are working to ensure troop safety. Now, couple of notes here. We covered previously how Haaretz did an investigation and uncovered that the number of injured IDF soldiers had been dramatically understated. They went to the hospitals and said, okay, how many have you taken in? How many IDF soldiers have you treated? Those numbers were far greater than what the IDF had admitted to. So when you're getting official IDF statistics, I think you have to take them with a grain of salt at this point. But nevertheless, Saagar, I mean, this shows extraordinary development if you have this high a proportion of the fatalities coming from friendly fire.
Yeah, well, this is the acknowledged friendly fire. And like you said, I think that's really what we have to focus in on. And one of the things I think that we wanted to try and highlight for everybody here is that the next phase of this is looking, unfortunately, as predicted, as chaotic and as bloody, and could actually be far more costly to the IDF as this continues, because the initial military operation was a lot of use of air power. Now, the initial ground operation, too, we saw the IDF take some casualties. It does definitely appear that they're covering some things up. But the reason why this friendly fire number is so important is it demonstrates how chaotic the situation is on the ground. I mean, for 20% of acknowledged casualties and deaths to be friendly fire incidents, that's an extraordinary number, not really on par with many Western military in any modern style campaign. It just highlights the chaotic nature of urban combat. Also just about, you know, frankly, troops who probably haven't seen a lot of combat in the past, and now they're doing this in the first place. You've got a lot of reservists who are there. U.S. military dealt with a lot of that, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this, as well as a battle we're about to get into. These two things militarily demonstrate the ongoing difficulty of what continuing to operate in this environment is going to look like, friendly fire, and as well as, unfortunately, the ongoing nature of occupying Gaza for the IDF whenever you've got a battle, which we're about to show everyone, which took place in North Gaza in an occupied area which was declared safe already and which had very little air power. It ends up being, Krystal, the deadliest incident so far for the IDF in the entire war.
And before I show you that, there is one other note that I want to make about this report on friendly fire. All of the friendly fire incidents that the IDF is claiming are post-October 7th. They have a note in here in that report from Ynet, and I believe this is like, Google translated. The English is a little bit clunky, but bear with me. They say casualties fell as a result of friendly fire on October 7th, but the IDF believes that beyond the operational investigations of the events, it would not be morally sound to investigate these incidents due to the immense and complex quantity of them that took place in the kibbutzim and southern Israeli communities due to the challenging situations the soldiers were in at the time. So we've already had some indications that most of the killing was certainly done by Hamas.
Yes.
We're not downplaying that. Keep that in mind with all of this. But that some of the deaths on October 7th on the Israeli side were because of friendly fire. And they acknowledge this in this report, but they also say, we have no interest in looking into it. We're not going to do an investigation. We don't think it would be morally, morally sound to investigate what the hell unfolded on that
I think
day,
they're going to say that now. I think a
extraordinary.
lot of Israelis are going to want more answers on that in the quote-unquote post-war period. Another reason why Netanyahu is trying his best to get as far away from that as possible. But we've teased the battle, so why don't we go ahead and play some of it now just to give people an idea of what this looked like. This was a battle in which 10 IDF soldiers lost their lives. Not only just 10, but 8 out of the 10 of them actually were officers. And it happened after Hamas actually ambushed an IDF small team. It was only 4 guys who ended up having to be rescued in an hours-long firefight. And again, this is in an area of Gaza which was declared safe, where they did not think that it was ongoing. It ends up, again, being the deadliest battle actually that's happened on the ground so far. Let's go ahead and play some of it.
This is footage released, by the way, by the IDF. We've played you Hamas's propaganda battle footage. This is IDF propaganda battle footage. But again, it gives you some sense of how difficult, how brutal things are on the ground. Let's put up the details of what happened in what may have been the deadliest incident so far on the Israeli side. This is per the Times of Israel. 10 soldiers, including 2 quite senior officers, killed in Gaza fighting and what they describe as a deadly ambush. From what I could tell from the description here, you basically had 4 soldiers who went into this cluster of 3 buildings. Again, as Saagar mentioned, this was near Gaza City, not in Gaza City, but in that part of northern Gaza that they have claimed they've basically, eliminated all the terrorists and pushed everybody out into southern Gaza. Well, not so in this instance. They thought that these buildings had been abandoned, surrounding a courtyard to carry out searches, and found the entrance of a tunnel. As the troops entered one of the buildings, Hamas terrorists ambushed them, hurling grenades, detonating an explosive device, and opening fire on them. Then, they're calling for help. Their superiors come in and try to rescue them. All 4 of those original soldiers lost their lives, along with a number of the other soldiers who came in to try to rescue the situation.
Yeah, I think, again, just to highlight it, it took place in an area that you thought was peaceful. Then you go into a building. It turns out there's an IED in there. IED either injures or kills everybody. Then everybody's terrified. And so what really highlighted to me is you had everybody up from a battalion commander on downward, colonels, lieutenant colonels, who somehow became involved in this operation, grabbed their rifles and decided to storm in there. And then multiple of them were actually killed. The search and rescue operation, the commanders of the operation, and obviously Hamas got the drop on them in terms of the ambush and what that looked like. It ended up being an hours-long firefight just to secure the entire area. And this highlights the nightmare of what actual military occupation is going to be. I don't think it's an accident that the deadliest incident so far took place in a so-called safe area. And this is what it is going to look like when you're trying to occupy this city in the long run. And I think certainly just like we found out in Iraq, it turned out that the initial 3 weeks mission accomplished phase was probably the easiest part of the entire Iraq war. And it was the follow-on, the holding the population, securing the area, and all of that ended up being some of the deadliest and most brutal fighting. And you can't bomb your way out of that one. And this is really what the reality of this type of military operation will look like, and probably will continue to look like for months, if not years to come, if they're going to remain engaged like this.
So that's sort of like the zoomed-in view of what this looks like on the ground, and one of the deadliest incidents on the Israeli side that we know about thus far. Let's zoom out. Economist had a good report about sort of where they are in terms of their alleged goal of eradicating Hamas. And, it's not that they've made no progress or done nothing, but they're nowhere near that goal, which I've always thought was a fantasy, the idea that you could completely eliminate Hamas. Put this up on the screen. They write in this piece the IDF may have destroyed as much as half of Hamas's force, although even that, the numbers don't really add up. The overall death numbers that we know of in Gaza, roughly 18,000, and at least 60% of those are women and children. So if you're saying maybe they've destroyed half of Hamas's force of perhaps 30,000 fighters, I'm just not sure where you're getting that math from. It may have come directly from the IDF. But even if you take those numbers, which are probably way overstated of how well they've done in eliminating Hamas members, Hamas still has thousands who merge from tunnels to carry out ambushes on Israeli soldiers, like the incident that we just told you about. In addition, you have about 100 Israeli soldiers, according to the IDF, who have been killed. Again, I would take those numbers with a grain of salt. Hamas still holding, of course, more than 130 hostages who were not released when the two sides called that truce and exchanged captives in November. Those hostages, of course, continue to be at grave risk, and Hamas has indicated that more than a dozen of them have actually been killed. Now, they're saying it's because of the Israeli assault, certainly possible, but we don't really know the circumstances surrounding that. They say here that they are in danger from constant bombing, of course. On December 8th, Israeli soldiers were wounded in a failed attempt to rescue a hostage. Hamas later showed gruesome footage of a dead hostage, a 25-year-old Israeli civilian, and claims that the Israelis killed him in their rescue attempt. Israel, that Hamas murdered the man shown in the video. So competing claims around what happened there. They go on to talk about, though, okay, outside of the rank-and-file fighters, that's where we are. They're at best have killed half, probably a lot fewer than that, and there are still thousands more to run out of tunnels, not to mention the new recruits that you are creating with your mass terror campaign on the Gaza Strip. Nor has Israel managed to obliterate Hamas's leadership or destroy its infrastructure. The IDF has killed a number of senior field commanders, but Yahya Sinwar, the group's overall boss, and two of their commanders of their fighting force have so far survived. That is thanks in part to Hamas's network of hundreds of miles of tunnels, which Israel's failed to destroy despite its firepower and its drone-borne surveillance capabilities. So even at the best-case scenario, Israel is nowhere near eradicating even the existing Hamas fighting force. And that's before we talk about, the longer-term impacts and the way that this has spiked support for Hamas, both in Gaza and in the West Bank.
Yeah, I think that's what the Economist piece really highlights, the military reality. Even if you accept the most rosy, kind of body count like figures that we would release during Vietnam, even within that, you've still got 50% of the fighters that remain active. What's another thing they point out is that the political sustainability of the campaign, is basically winding up in terms of U.S. support. President Biden and Secretary Blinken both apparently telling Netanyahu you got to wrap things up by the end of the year. That's only 16 days away. And so then what's the next day going to look like? What exactly are you going to do? What is the plan for the Gaza Strip? Counterpoints brought everybody the news that Netanyahu outright rejected any idea of not only a two-state solution, but of a Palestinian Authority governing it. So it's like, well, what now? And in a break-it-you-buy-it scenario, especially, hopefully, that America's not dumb enough to go in there and to clean up Israel's mess for them, they're the ones who are going to be responsible for it. And in a way, they morally should be. It's like you went in, you destroyed most of the city, you're doing this under the guise of killing all of these people. Now you're responsible for security, you're responsible for the civilian population, you're responsible for providing water, food, security, and even, let's say, even if they don't care about any of that, even to continue their military operations against Hamas, you have to have staging areas like in Gaza, North Gaza. That's what all those guys were doing there in the first place. So I'm really starting to see a lot of signs, and a lot of military analysts I spoke to as well, that this is going to be a brutal and bloody campaign where once you've moved past things that you can bomb, and you have to actually come in there, clear out areas. It's a painful step-by-step type process, and you're actually responsible for holding this ground. More and more of these types of incidents, the one where 10 IDF soldiers lost their lives just in a single battle, and now you have the chaotic nature of it revealed in the friendly fire incidents. It just shows people, and I think Israelis too, that is their future. That's what the future is going to look like for as long as that they remain active inside of it.
Based on the comments from Netanyahu, asking his senior aide to develop plans to quote unquote thin out the population of Gaza, based on the report that came out from that, yes, I know, sort of like side ministry that everyone's saying is not all that important, but weighed the different options for what happens after the war in Gaza, where they said, listen, ideally, we're going to push all these people into Egypt. Based on the fact that they are floating legislation and plans here in the U.S., that apparently has some bipartisan support about, hey, we're going to push the regional countries to take in this number of refugees in Egypt and this many in Jordan, et cetera, et cetera. To me, it seems very clear what their ideal situation is. What they want to do is to make Gaza uninhabitable and then use the humanitarian crisis to say, well, the only humanitarian thing to do is to resettle these people in Egypt, to resettle them in Jordan, to resettle perhaps some of them in the United States. And that's, and frame this total ethnic cleansing as some sort of a humanitarian solution. Now, Egypt has publicly been very against this.
They threaten war.
The U.S. has publicly been very against this. But if we get to that place where, already, they're now flooding the tunnels with seawater to destroy the infrastructure. Okay, you can say understandable. On the other hand, this is going to destroy the groundwater for generations to come. Northern Gaza is already completely destroyed and unlivable. Now the indiscriminate bombing campaign has moved to the south, rendering those areas unlivable. They've razed farmland, they've destroyed greenhouses, etc. So to me, that seems very clear that that's the path that they want to pursue, that in their minds, Netanyahu and his government want to move towards. The only question is whether or not the U.S. is going to enable that or accept it, if they're going to do more than sort of weekly protest and let the thing unfold. So I think, to me, it seems very clear that that's the goal, whether or not they're able to ultimately achieve it.
I'm a broken record. Whether it's a goal or not, we're actually not the check, it's the Arab states. I think the Arab states would threaten literal war if that were to happen. Egypt has already said that they'll sacrifice millions of lives. And here's the thing, it is actually a matter of national survival. And also, they don't want them. The Egyptians, Sisi, for example, apparently, by the way, Sisi is very popular than ever. You know why he doesn't want these Palestinians? Because a bunch of these Hamas guys are Islamists. And Sisi hates Islamists. He came to power by overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood. The King of Jordan goes to sleep every night and prays for his life to make sure that the Muslim Brotherhood and all these Palestinians who now live in his country aren't going to uprise against him, because there's nothing that he could do about it. If you think he's going to let in a bunch of Gazans, no way. All of these people. And then I guess the next question is America. Now, I think that some people are dumb enough to have, millions of people come and resettle here, but I would say hell no to that one. I think it's all Israel's fault. So they're boxed in. They can want many things. For what's realistically going to happen, they're responsible for this. They can come to the scenario now, or they can come to scenario 6 months from now. But in my opinion, this whole ethnic cleansing plan of theirs, it's just not going to work. There's just no political sustainability for it.
The last thing I'll say about that before we move on to the next piece is, obviously ethnic cleansing is wrong and bad and incredibly immoral. It also seems to me incredibly foolish to think that if you just displace Palestinians to other countries, that they're going to give up the fight. If you push them out of Gaza into Egypt, let's say, or into other surrounding countries, you think they're just going to lay down and die and accept that they've lost? No, they're not. They're not. I think as long as there is breath in their body and any scrap of hope that they could reclaim some semblance of their lost land, they're going to continue to fight. So the idea that that plan would be any sort of security improvement for Israel, I think, is also a fantasy. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.